Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up in a world where survival depends on understanding unwritten rules of violence? Or maybe you're curious about the roots of systemic violence in urban communities and how it affects children. If so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun by Geoffrey Canada. Hey everyone, welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're diving into Geoffrey Canada's powerful memoir and social analysis. Fist, Stick, Gun, Knife, A Personal History of Violence in America came out in the 1990s, although it has since been updated. And this book offers a gripping first-hand look at growing up in the Bronx during the 1950s and 1960s. And it also explores how violence becomes an ingrained part of a community. In this book, we see a blend of personal narrative as well as some sociological critique. Canada recounts his childhood. As I said, he grew up in the South Bronx in an environment where children had to learn the rules of violence at a very young age. As the title suggests, the progression from fistfights to knives and even guns mirrors the escalating danger in his neighborhood. Canada starts with stories of playground fights where using fists was the norm, and over time, however, the stakes grew higher. He describes how the introduction of weapons into these conflicts transformed not just the violence itself, but the culture around it. He tells several stories where he got in fights with people. One of the first stories he tells is when his mother gave him some money to go buy some beans, and then on his way home, he's going to be jumped and someone is going to take the at least the change. I think they may have taken the beans as well. He goes to his mother and he tells his mother, and he expects his mother to be sympathetic and to help him somehow do something about getting the beans, but instead she is furious and she sends him back, essentially forces him to confront this individual that had attacked him. And she has a no-nonsense approach to her son being independent and being self-sufficient, at least in respect to how he engages with violence as it is expected within his community. This can be a bit challenging for some people to read, and it is going to be all throughout these books. Now, Geoffrey Canada himself then goes on from that and tells a little bit about how he is going to be successful in school, how that is going to give him an opportunity to go to college and even to graduate school. But all along the way, he is still seeing more of these stories that help to characterize what it is like and what kind of systems are in place that make it so that an individual like himself, who grows up in a poor urban community, that is just faced with the fears and challenges of living in a community like that. And there's a fair amount of frank discussion in this about the type of violence that is going to be part and parcel of that. I think that was a really interesting look. It is worth pointing out a few things. As he tells all his various stories, he is very much telling them from his own perspective. So he doesn't actually put a ton of statistics in this book, which I would have appreciated a few more. And it does get to a point where he is no longer still involved in these conflicts. He's grown up, he has been successful, and he's moved out of this poverty-stricken community. But what you do see is his desire to continue to be engaged and to use the lessons that he learned growing up in dealing with children that are still having this predilection to conflict in response to the communities that they grow up in. And so he tells several more stories. One includes him as a principal or the headmaster or some kind of leader at a school, where he finally tells two boys that won't stop fighting that he wants them to fight and just get it all out. And because he realizes they only fight when people are around, and he realizes that this is really just some kind of virtue signaling that they're using for this fight, because they know that it's going to get broken up, and so it looks like they're mean and tough, but they're not actually really going to fight each other all that much. And so he uses that to his advantage. Or he tells quite a few stories once he has come back to the community in which he grew up, or at least close by. He starts various programs designed to help get children out of this circle of violence and poverty. And he talks about all the different things he has to deal with, some of the gangs and just other violent factions which he has to deal with, and how that affects his effort at helping people to learn and to grow. It's interesting that he uses quite a few things to help his students, and one of the big things is that he actually teaches them how to fight and teaches them some kind of martial arts. I don't remember which kind exactly, but the point is he uses this as a method of discipline, and he says it's incredibly valuable because on the flip side, he has this expectation that they are not actually allowed to fight outside of the classroom. And so this is something used to help them get out their aggression, get out their anger, but also learn discipline. And admittedly, as you're reading this, you will see these moments of success. You'll also see a lot of disappointments and frustrations. I do think that the amount of stories that he tells about himself are really insightful. They're also very individualized, which can make it a problem for any kind of scaling up of any of the things that he takes on. Because the nonprofit, the school and the program that he develops, I would say it's been very successful from what I can tell, but it's also relatively small. And this isn't something that could probably be taken on beyond a municipality level, at a state level, or at a federal level. I think that there's a lot of his personal experience in that have made this a success for him. So you can see all these various stories that he is using, not just to tell his own personal story, but then how he is applying them in the place that he's growing up. There's a few main things that he really highlights that he considers the underlying reasons for these problems. And the first one is, of course, the normalization of violence. I mean, he really illustrates how violence becomes normalized in communities like his. And so kids grow up learning the rules of survival. That is the emphasis that he puts on it. And in that way of survival, that sometimes requires a connection to a slightly larger community. So maybe a gang or something of that nature, which often means fighting to protect themselves as well as their family or fellow gang members. This can include a lot of heartbreaking moments where children are being robbed of their innocence. That is going to be one of the first things that pops out to you in this story, because Geoffrey Canada, he seems very intelligent, very kind-hearted, very thoughtful individual. And so as you're reading this story and realizing the types of things he had to go through simply to survive, I mean, that is the real thing that shines through this book, is that he went through these things and he kept those values and he kept that desire to grow and to learn despite the external forces that made that harder and harder for him. He also looks at roles of systemic oppression. He doesn't just recount his experiences, he does examine the societal factors that are going to perpetuate this violence. Of course, that is going to include stuff like poverty, racial discrimination, failing schools, and all the things that contribute to an environment where young people feel trapped and they turn to violence as a way to assert control. He talks about the cycles of escalation. Like I said, the title itself captures that progression of violence, and Canada explains how the introduction of weapons, especially guns, completely changes the dynamics of conflicts. And he contrasts the playground fights of his youth with the deadly stakes that kids face today, that in many regards is simply an escalation from those early moments of violence. And so then this is where his whole purpose of a need for community intervention, and essentially his whole purpose in life, has been trying to create important programs and education that helps to break that cycle of violence. Like I said, he becomes a prominent advocate for the initiatives like the Harlem Children's Zone. That's the thing that he's probably most famous for, which aims to give kids alternatives to the violence that they are facing. I really enjoyed this book. I don't remember what exactly drew me to it. This was a book I started years ago. I think it was due and I had to return it, and I just didn't get a chance to get back to it. I'm not sure why I picked it up again. I think it was on Spotify when I couldn't find it in when I couldn't find it anywhere else. But I've heard a lot of thought leaders, not just academics, but advocates and people that I admire, have really have had high praises for Geoffrey Canada and the success that he's had. And so that's what made me pick this up. And it really is a memoir, and it is also someone that is giving you insight into something that just doesn't make sense to a lot of people on the outside. When you come from a safe, secure community, it can be easy to misunderstand why violence can become so prevalent and the challenges to preventing violence, and how that is an interaction between individuals and their communities and society and culture at large. And so all of those things, I think, play an important role in helping him to tell his story, and I think he does an excellent job. That being said, it doesn't have a ton of facts and figures. This is someone telling an individual story, and almost all of the facts and figures are going to be directly related to his experience. So it is not telling you at large, say, how many people die a year from fighting, whether that involves fists, sticks, knives, or guns, any of the things that he characterizes in that progression. But all in all, I do think that this is a very compelling memoir that certainly gives me an added motivation to see how we can improve our communities and help individuals, especially get out of a cycle of violence. And that's what I found most appealing about this. So who would I say this book is for? Well, anyone that is interested in that exploration of societal issues, anywhere that you have a breakdown in a peaceful community, or anything that has prevented the creation of a peaceful community. In this case, that is, of course, exploring a variety of things, but most importantly, it is telling the narrative of this individual. I think if you are interested in that narrative approach, you will enjoy this book. And if you're interested in that exploration of violence and what causes it and the unwritten rules of it, then I think this will appeal to you. Who is this book not for? Well, obviously at the core of what he's talking about is systemic issues such as racism, poverty, violence. if you take issue with any of those questions about why there is wealth inequality or disparity in quality of life in the United States, then you may not care to read this book. Or if you are not interested in a book that does at its heart deal with a lot of violence. And there are some heartbreaking moments. Obviously, Geoffrey Canada makes it through his boyhood without dying. Hence his ability to go on and write this book. But not everyone he talks about does. And so you also will have those really heartbreaking moments. And even as an adult, there are going to be quite a few figures that he is going to work with, whether it is students at his program or whether it's fellow teachers. All of that is giving you these important relationships that run the risk of being hurt or being killed. And all of that can, of course, make this a bit of a challenge to read. But by and large, I would recommend this to individuals that think that an exploration of an individual's life from a challenging community and the insights that he can bring from that, I think that you would find this a valuable book. But please, let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear more about this memoir in particular, your thoughts, your feedback, anything you might have to say about his premise or his thesis. Please let me know in the comments. Of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.